In the ancient world, one empire rose above all others in terror and might, the Assyrian Empire. Known for its brutal conquests and unmatched military power, Assyria was a force no city could withstand. With an army of 185,000 seasoned warriors, King Sennacherib was on a relentless campaign, crushing every kingdom in his path, and Jerusalem was next. But just as victory seemed inevitable, something unimaginable happened. In a single night, the mighty Assyrian army faced a force beyond human comprehension, leaving behind only silence and unanswered questions. Could it be true that one prayer altered the course of history? If you're ready to discover how Jerusalem defied all odds and survived a siege that should have wiped it off the map, stay with us. Before we dive in, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more incredible stories like this. Let's uncover one of the most astonishing battles of faith and resilience in ancient history. His troops, seasoned in countless battles, formed an army of staggering strength. 185,000 men strong, warriors whose combat experience and resilience were unmatched. They had marched relentlessly across vast lands, crushing every city that dared stand in their path. Now, their sights were set on a new target: Jerusalem. As night descended, the Assyrian encampment glowed under the silver light of the moon. Shields gleamed, weapons lay ready, and the disciplined silence of the soldiers was broken only by the occasional murmur of anticipation. Each man knew his role, each weapon had been sharpened, and each heart was steeled for the victory that felt all but certain. This was not just another campaign. This was the conquest of a city that had dared to defy Assyrian supremacy. They were sure that, by dawn, Jerusalem would fall, crushed under the might of their unstoppable machine of war. But beyond the walls of their encampment, another world waited, one vastly different from the ordered chaos of the Assyrian camp. In Jerusalem, the people watched and waited. They had heard of the Assyrian conquests, had seen the devastation left behind in its wake. Now, they stood face to face with the empire's wrath. The city of Jerusalem, surrounded by its walls and sealed off from any escape, had become a cage with thousands of terrified people trapped inside, aware that death loomed just outside the gates. Unbeknownst to the Assyrian warriors, however, the fate of this city would be unlike any they had encountered before. For Jerusalem was not merely another kingdom in their path, it was the city of a god whose power and purpose extended beyond human understanding. What began as an ordinary night in the Assyrian encampment would soon be remembered as the dawn of a miraculous intervention, one that would echo throughout history. Inside Jerusalem's walls, tension hung heavy in the air. The people, young and old alike, could feel the weight of the Assyrian threat pressing in on them. They had seen and heard tales of the Assyrian army's brutal conquests, the ruthless efficiency with which they overran city after city, leaving behind a trail of desolation. Now, Jerusalem was the last fortress standing in their path. King Hezekiah and his advisors knew the stakes were higher than ever. Surrender would mean complete devastation, while resistance felt almost like a hopeless gamble. For Hezekiah, the burden was not just a matter of protecting his people. It was personal. His heart ached at the thought of his beloved city, the city of his ancestors, the city of his God, reduced to ashes. With the Assyrian forces stationed just outside the city, he understood that Jerusalem's defenses were meager compared to the Assyrians' vast numbers and advanced siege machines. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, surrender was not an option. Hezekiah had decided to place Jerusalem's fate in the hands of a higher power. As the citizens watched, Hezekiah moved among them, his face grave but resolute. He urged them to prepare for what could be a prolonged siege, ensuring that resources were rationed and defenses bolstered. People crowded around him, their fear unmistakable in their eyes, but he tried to meet their gaze with reassurance. "Be strong," he would tell them. "There is still hope, though it may seem faint." Jerusalem's people, once vibrant and bustling, now clung to whatever faith they could muster. Families huddled in their homes, some weeping softly, while others offered desperate prayers. The temple was filled with the murmurs of those seeking solace, their voices lifting as they clung to the promise that their God was watching over them. Outside, the Assyrians waited, casting a long, ominous shadow over their lives. The sound of marching feet, distant but steady, served as a reminder of the siege that would soon press even closer. While Hezekiah's courage inspired some, many struggled to find hope. Doubts crept into the hearts of those who had already seen the fall of their neighbors to the north. Lands reduced to ruins, people dragged off into exile. Jerusalem's fate seemed all but sealed. There was a palpable tension in the city, a sense that they stood at the edge of a precipice, caught between despair and faith. Yet Hezekiah remained resolute. Though the odds were impossible, he believed Jerusalem was not alone in this battle. Despite the overwhelming power of the enemy, he felt the presence of something greater, a force unseen yet undeniably real. Hezekiah knew that Jerusalem's hope was not bound to the strength of its walls or the size of its army. He urged his people to believe, to trust in the God who had chosen Jerusalem as his own. Little did they know, this faith would soon be tested beyond their wildest fears. As the Assyrian forces gathered strength outside Jerusalem, a voice of calm certainty emerged from within the city walls, a voice that offered hope amid the growing dread. Isaiah, the prophet of God, a man respected and known for his unwavering faith, spoke to the people and to their king. His words, inspired by visions and revelations, carried a weight of authority that silenced even the most fearful hearts. Isaiah's message was clear. The God of Israel had seen the arrogance of the Assyrian king and would not let it go unanswered. Isaiah's words struck with the force of a divine promise. "This city shall not fall to the Assyrians. The Lord himself will defend Jerusalem." To those listening, this assurance was almost unimaginable. Yet Isaiah spoke with a confidence that was unshakable. He reminded them of God's covenant with their forefathers, a promise that transcended human power and earthly empires. It was this same God who had delivered them from Egypt, who had made their nation strong, and who now would shield them from the Assyrian menace. Isaiah's voice rang through the city like a beacon in the darkness. But Isaiah's words were not just about hope, they also carried a warning. He revealed that God had allowed the Assyrians to rise in power, to conquer many lands, yet they had crossed a line. Their pride, their boastful declarations, and their mockery of the God of Israel had stirred divine anger. Isaiah proclaimed that Jerusalem's survival would not only prove God's sovereignty, but also serve as a judgment against the Assyrian Empire's arrogance. "They shall come to our walls," he said, "but they shall not enter." As Isaiah spoke, the people of Jerusalem listened with a new sense of resolve. Fear still lingered, but hope began to stir within them. For Hezekiah, Isaiah's message was a lifeline. Despite the tension, he felt a newfound clarity, a reminder that Jerusalem's true defender was not an army or a wall, but God himself. Isaiah's prophecy became a rallying cry, urging the city to stand firm and place their trust not in human defenses, but in divine protection. With the Assyrians drawing nearer each day, Isaiah's message continued to echo through the hearts of the people. They knew they were not facing this threat alone, and though the path ahead seemed fraught with danger, Isaiah's words served as a reminder of Jerusalem's destiny and the divine power that watched over them. With Isaiah's prophecy in his heart, King Hezekiah took action. He knew that faith was not a call to passivity, it demanded readiness. Hezekiah set out to strengthen Jerusalem, making every possible preparation to withstand a prolonged siege. He consulted his advisors and gathered the city's skilled workers, instructing them to reinforce the city walls, fill in any breaches, and fortify weak points. They raised watchtowers at key locations, expanding the city's defenses to hold back the Assyrian onslaught, if only for a while. One of Hezekiah's most remarkable undertakings was a feat of engineering that would secure Jerusalem's water supply, the lifeline of any city under siege. Realizing that the city's existing wells would be insufficient, Hezekiah ordered the construction of a tunnel that would bring fresh water from the Gihon spring into the city. This project, known today as the Siloam Tunnel, required precision and relentless effort. Workers dug tirelessly through solid rock, chipping away day and night to complete the tunnel before the Assyrians closed in. The tunnel became a symbol of Hezekiah's wisdom and foresight, a testimony to his commitment to preserving Jerusalem's life. Beyond the physical preparations, Hezekiah also took measures to unify and rally the people. He knew that fear had a way of weakening even the strongest defenses. He gathered the people, young and old, in the city squares, speaking to them as both a leader and a father. Standing before them, he reminded them of Isaiah's prophecy, of the promises that their God had made. "Be strong and courageous," he urged them. "Do not be afraid or discouraged because of the Assyrian king and his vast army. There is a greater power with us than with him." His words cut through the silence, resonating deeply with those who listened. In this moment, Hezekiah was more than a king. He was a shepherd, guiding his people to a place of faith and courage. As he spoke, the people could see the strength in Hezekiah's eyes, the quiet confidence that came from his trust in God. Hezekiah's faith was contagious, igniting a spark within the city. Mothers whispered words of encouragement to their children. Fathers held their heads high, and young soldiers who had feared the coming battle stood a little taller. The people of Jerusalem began to feel that they were not merely defending their lives, they were defending something sacred, the city of their God. With each stone laid on the walls, each sword forged and shield strengthened, Jerusalem prepared itself not only for survival, but for a stand that would prove to be legendary. Under Hezekiah's leadership, the city's defenses grew stronger, but more importantly, so did the hearts of the people. Their king had shown them that though they faced the mightiest empire of their age, their resolve and faith were stronger still. Together, they awaited the storm, fortified not only by walls and weapons, but by the faith that, in this battle, they were not alone. As the Assyrian army established its presence outside Jerusalem, the silence within the city was shattered by a voice that pierced through the air, a voice full of arrogance and menace. The Assyrians had sent their emissary, the Rabshakeh, to speak directly to the people of Jerusalem. Standing outside the walls but within earshot of the city, the Rabshakeh raised his voice, delivering a message that was as calculated as it was ruthless. He addressed not just Hezekiah's officials but the people themselves, speaking in Hebrew so that everyone on the walls, from soldiers to commoners, could understand. It was a tactic designed to spread fear, to break their spirit from within. "Do not let Hezekiah deceive you," he shouted. "He cannot deliver you from our king. Do not let him convince you that your God will save you. Have the gods of any other nations saved them from the might of the Assyrian king?" His words echoed through the city, each sentence dripping with scorn. The Rabshakeh's speech was more than just a threat. It was a psychological attack meant to dismantle the people's faith. He compared the God of Israel to the idols of conquered nations, reducing him to nothing more than a regional deity with no power against Assyria's relentless force. He offered a false choice, suggesting that surrender would bring peace and a life of comfort under Assyrian rule. "Make peace with me," he urged, "and each of you will eat from your own vine and fig tree, and drink water from your own cistern." Hezekiah's officials, standing atop the walls, implored him to speak in Aramaic, the language of diplomacy, to avoid demoralizing the people. But the Rabshakeh only raised his voice louder, ensuring that every soul within the walls could hear his words. His message was clear. Resistance was futile, and their faith in Hezekiah and their God was misplaced. As his voice faded, a heavy silence settled over Jerusalem. His words had sown seeds of doubt, and fear spread like wildfire among the people. The city that had felt so resolute now trembled, not from the strength of Assyria's weapons, but from the corrosive power of intimidation. The people looked to Hezekiah and to their God, desperate for reassurance, clinging to the fragile hope that the promises they had heard would hold against the terror that loomed outside their walls. In the face of the Assyrian threats, King Hezekiah sought refuge not in fortifications or alliances, but in the presence of God. The words of the Rabshakeh had shaken Jerusalem. Yet Hezekiah knew that his greatest weapon in this battle was neither a sword nor a wall, but faith itself. With the full weight of his kingdom pressing upon him, he retreated into the temple, his heart heavy yet steadfast, ready to place the city's fate in the hands of the Almighty. There, in the stillness of the temple, Hezekiah poured out his heart before God. He took the Assyrian message, written words of defiance and arrogance, and laid it out before the altar. The act was a symbolic gesture of surrender, a way of acknowledging that this battle was beyond any human control. "Lord, the God of Israel, enthroned between the cherubim, you alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth," he began, his voice steady yet filled with the weight of desperation. He recognized the magnitude of the threat before them, but he also knew the power of the one to whom he prayed. Hezekiah's prayer was simple, but it resonated with profound faith. He acknowledged the strength of the Assyrian Empire, their victories, and the gods they had crushed. But he also reminded God and himself that these were idols made of wood and stone, creations of human hands, powerless against the creator of the universe. "Now, Lord our God, deliver us from his hand, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone, Lord, are God," he implored. This was more than a plea for survival. It was a declaration of faith, a cry for God's name to be exalted above all others. Outside, the people waited, some gripped by fear, others holding on to the fragile hope inspired by their king's resolve. They had seen Hezekiah enter the temple, and they knew that he was seeking guidance and deliverance not from his own strength, but from a divine power. In this moment, the king's prayer became the prayer of the people. It was a moment of unity, where fear gave way to a shared dependence on the God who had led them through countless trials before. As Hezekiah rose, his spirit was no longer weighed down by the enemy at the gates. He had done all he could, fortified the city, strengthened the people's hearts, and placed his trust in God. Now the king returned to his people, ready to face whatever would come, fortified by a faith that was as unbreakable as the stones of Jerusalem's walls. As night fell over Jerusalem, a tense silence enveloped the city. Inside the walls, families huddled together, soldiers stood watch, and the people prayed, clinging to the hope that Hezekiah's faith would bring them deliverance. Outside the walls, the Assyrian camp stretched across the landscape, their tents flickering under the moonlight. An endless sea of enemy warriors prepared to strike at dawn. The Assyrians, confident and unshaken, lay waiting, assured of their impending victory. But this was not a night like any other. In the stillness, unseen and unheard, something extraordinary began to unfold. As Jerusalem lay in restless anticipation, a divine presence moved through the Assyrian camp. A force beyond human comprehension, swift and silent. Without warning, the angel of the Lord passed through their ranks, bringing with him a judgment that would echo throughout history. It was an intervention that no human could resist, a power that no army, no matter how vast or disciplined, could withstand. By morning, the once thriving Assyrian encampment was silent. The rising sun revealed a scene of desolation, with countless soldiers lying motionless in their tents. The proud army that had boasted of its invincibility had been struck down in a single night. Jerusalem's people, watching from the walls, could hardly believe their eyes. Where they had expected a battle, they found only silence and the chilling stillness of defeat. The Assyrians who had surrounded them, who had boasted of their strength and taunted their faith, were gone. The scope of the miracle was unfathomable. In a single, decisive act, God had answered Hezekiah's prayer, vindicating the faith of Jerusalem's people and proving that no earthly power could stand against his will. The people of Jerusalem felt a mix of awe and relief, overcome by the sheer magnitude of what they were witnessing. They had been saved not by might or by strategy, but by an intervention from the heavens, a victory beyond human explanation. As news of the defeat spread, those who had doubted were silenced, and those who had prayed saw their faith rewarded in ways they could scarcely have imagined. The Assyrian survivors, dazed and humiliated, gathered their belongings and returned to their homeland in silence, led by their shaken king. Sennacherib, who had so confidently declared his conquest of Jerusalem, now fled back to Nineveh in disgrace. The empire that had once seemed unstoppable was left reeling, its power overshadowed by the god of a seemingly defenseless city. For Hezekiah and the people of Jerusalem, this victory was more than a military triumph. It was a profound testament to the faithfulness of their God. The Assyrian army, once poised to destroy them, had been laid low by a single night's intervention. In the aftermath, Jerusalem's people lifted their voices in praise, offering gratitude for the miraculous salvation they had witnessed. The city had faced annihilation and emerged unscathed, not by human strength, but by the mighty hand of God. The Assyrian king Sennacherib returned to Nineveh, a shadow of the ruler he had once been. The same man who had boasted of his conquests, who had sent messages of intimidation and scorn to the people of Jerusalem, now walked through the gates of his city in humiliation. The defeat outside Jerusalem was a blow not only to his pride, but to the very reputation of the Assyrian Empire. Sennacherib's power, once considered untouchable, had been shaken by an invisible hand. For the people of Assyria, this loss was as inexplicable as it was profound. Their king, who had seemed invincible, had failed against a city that should have been easily conquered. Back in Nineveh, Sennacherib sought solace in his palace and the grand temples that lined the city. Yet, despite the wealth and glory that surrounded him, there was an emptiness that no treasure or symbol of power could fill. He had faced defeat not by human hands, but by a force beyond his control, and the realization haunted him. The victory he had envisioned over Jerusalem had slipped away, leaving behind only the bitter taste of failure. But Sennacherib's story did not end with a simple retreat. While worshiping in the temple of his god, Nisroch, he was struck down by his own sons. In an act of betrayal, they took his life, ending his rule in a moment of violence that mirrored the brutal legacy he had left behind. The once mighty king, who had mocked the God of Israel, met his end in a place of worship, a stark irony that underscored the limits of his power. His death was not only a personal downfall but marked a symbolic turning point in the decline of the Assyrian Empire. The fall of Sennacherib sent ripples across the ancient world. For many, it was a reminder that even the most formidable empires were not immune to the judgment of a higher power. The Assyrians, who had once struck fear across nations, now saw their ruler undone not by the swords of men, but by the hidden hand of destiny. The people of Jerusalem, hearing of Sennacherib's fate, understood this as a final affirmation that God had heard their prayers, that their deliverance had been sealed in both victory and justice. In the years that followed, the power of Assyria continued to wane, and its territories slipped from its grasp. The once dominant empire that had threatened Jerusalem's very existence began to fade, while Jerusalem, by contrast, stood strong, a testament to faith and resilience against insurmountable odds. The miraculous survival of Jerusalem did not remain just a story of faith. It found echoes in history and archaeology, lending credibility to an event that seemed almost unbelievable. Over the years, discoveries have confirmed key aspects of the biblical account, providing insight into the scale and authenticity of what transpired. Among the most compelling pieces of evidence is the Prism of Sennacherib, a clay artifact bearing the inscriptions of the Assyrian king himself, detailing his military campaigns in Judah. In the prism, Sennacherib boasts of his conquests over several fortified cities in the region and describes how he had Hezekiah shut up in Jerusalem like a bird in a cage. Yet, notably, the prism does not claim victory over Jerusalem. For a king known for meticulous records of his triumphs, this omission is striking. In his own words, Sennacherib acknowledges the siege but stops short of declaring the city's fall, aligning with the biblical narrative that the Assyrian forces were unable to breach Jerusalem's walls. For scholars and historians, this omission speaks volumes, supporting the claim that something extraordinary, something unexpected, halted the Assyrian advance. Additionally, Greek historian Herodotus wrote of a mysterious disaster that struck an Assyrian army in Egypt, an account that, while differing in detail, echoes the biblical description of an army decimated overnight by an inexplicable force. Though Herodotus's records are not identical to the story of Jerusalem, they reinforce the notion that the Assyrian Empire encountered a supernatural obstacle beyond its control. Archaeological excavations in Jerusalem have also uncovered remnants of Hezekiah's preparations for the siege. The Siloam Tunnel, a remarkable feat of engineering from this period, is a testament to Hezekiah's foresight. Dug through solid rock, the tunnel channeled water from the Gihon spring into the city, ensuring that Jerusalem could endure a prolonged siege. The tunnel, still accessible today, stands as a physical link to this pivotal moment, showcasing the strategic efforts that complemented Hezekiah's faith in God. Even in the ruins of Lachish, a city near Jerusalem that the Assyrians did conquer, archaeologists have discovered vivid reliefs depicting the brutality of the Assyrian siege, evidence of the terror that Jerusalem narrowly escaped. Each artifact, each inscription, adds depth to the biblical account, painting a picture of a city that should have fallen, yet didn't. Through these discoveries, history and faith intertwine, preserving the story of Jerusalem's miraculous survival for generations. In a story that defies expectations, the survival of Jerusalem against the mightiest empire of its time stands as one of history's most compelling examples of faith and resilience. King Hezekiah's unwavering trust sparked an outcome beyond all human calculation. An Assyrian army of 185,000, ready to conquer, was suddenly halted in a single night. This was more than a victory. It was a turning point that hinted at forces greater than any human power. It leaves us with a thought-provoking question. Could a single act of faith truly alter the course of history? If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and tapping the notification bell to join us as we explore more stories of remarkable strength, faith, and resilience. Thank you for watching. We look forward to sharing more incredible journeys with you.